After you define what your objective is and your goal of influencer marketing, it's time to incorporate a game plan and what you're going to do to execute. So we're going to dive into the strategy behind using influencers. Now, all the previous examples that I provided, I want you to see that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Each partnership and each strategy that you employ is unique to your brand. It's unique to whom you're working with, and it's unique to what you're trying to accomplish. So the main thing that you need to consider is, who do you work with, right? So when you talk about influencer marketing, there's a sea of different people with a trusted group of people engaging with them and following them. So there's a lot of trust that you can leverage. Now it's, who should you leverage? If you don't partner with the right influencers for your product, the campaign is doomed from the start. And I really can't emphasize this enough. So there are some things that you need to consider when you're thinking about, who should I go work with? Think about it in the context of apartment bartender, right? What is the brand voice and aesthetic alignment of the person that I want to work with? For me personally, with apartment bartender, I have a very lighthearted voice. I have a very authoritative voice in the drink space, just because that's what I do. That's the niche that I focus on. I spend every day in terms of like reading and researching and traveling. So I'm in that world. And so when you're working with somebody, consider what their voice is, and does it align with your brand voice as well? Think about aesthetic. Visuals are very, very important on social. So take Instagram, for example. You get half a second to capture someone's attention when they're scrolling. So that photo or whatever you post should be visually appealing to catch their attention. Now, if the person that you're working with doesn't create their own content, or if they don't post things that are as visually appealing, but your brand is prided on the visuals that you create and the visuals that you post, and you have that as an important pillar of what you do, then you might want to reconsider working with that particular influencer if you feel like the aesthetic doesn't align, or if you feel like we have very different voices and how he relates or how she relates to their audience is very different than how we relate to ours. So there's not a lot of alignment there. Another thing to consider is their reach and where that reach is. Is it local? Is it national? Is it global? For me in particular, I have a little bit of both, more on the national and global side, just because with the world of spirits, it's all over. You know, there's how the UK and Europe does things, there's how the US does things, there's Mexico, there's islands, there's the world of spirits is all over. And so it's really important for me, and it was important for me from the start, not to box myself into just local. However, I still do have a local reach. Now, there are campaigns that I have been approached with that's like, hey, we want to promote this really craft local spirit, and there's an event going on here in Denver. And they asked me, what is your audience size in Denver? What's your particular reach in Denver? Or I've had campaign opportunities in other parts of the country where I didn't have a good audience size and I didn't have reach there, and so it didn't make sense for me and that brand to work together, even though I'm considered an influencer. Because my reach wasn't in that particular region, it didn't make sense to work together on that particular campaign. So as you're thinking about who to work with, think about and find out where their reach is. And if you have a campaign that is national and you feel like that particular influencer can reach and help to reach the audience that you're looking to reach through their own audience, then consider working with that person. Audience size and demographics, that is really important as well. So social media influencers and celebrities and authors and bloggers or podcasters or Twitter personalities, like they all have their own size of audience. That might be 1,000, that might be 10,000, that might be 100,000 or 1,000,000. But consider, what is the size of people that you're looking to reach? And then also, how does that break down? Is it more geared towards men? Is it geared towards women? How does that split? If, say for example, if you are a a product that is more geared towards a female demographic. I've worked with brands that have approached me to go towards a female demographic, and with Apartment Bartender, it's about a 60-40 split, right? So 60% male, about 40-45% female. And so there is relevance in terms of working together depending on what you are trying to accomplish and what your objective is. Now, those are some things to consider as well when you're talking about working with a particular influencer. Like, what is the size of their audience? And then also, how does that break down? Industry is huge. For me in particular, I work in the spirits industry, in the cocktail industry, with some crossover into hospitality and travel, because again, in the drink space, it's all encompassing: food, hotels, traveling. There really isn't anywhere where cocktails aren't, right? But in terms of if a brand is really focused on fashion, I don't do a lot of fashion. I pretty much wear the same thing all the time: jeans, a shirt, and boots. It doesn't get more creative than that. So brands that are big in the fashion space aren't going to work with someone like me, because my audience isn't engaging with me to find out what am I wearing. An occasional post about boots and stuff, because I'm obsessed with boots, and I've done partnerships with different boot brands because that's very relevant for the things that I put out and the content that I create. But again, consider what industry are you in? What are you targeting? Where do you want those people to be? And work with influencers that have relevance in that particular industry. Otherwise, if you just go to somebody with 100,000 followers, but they are doing something in the food space and you want to target the fashion space, that has no relevance with one another. Another to consider is location. And this is similar to their reach. Where are they located? Do you want to work with somebody that is based in the US? There are a lot of brands that approach me and they want to know where my reach is, and typically speaking, if it's in the US, then they want to work there. Location also relates to budget. If you want to work with someone that's based in Europe, then you might have to cover their travel and expenses to come to the US, or vice versa. I traveled the world last year, was in Scotland multiple times, Singapore, I was in Ireland. I've traveled the world doing this, but location's really important. The reason location is important is because a brand might want to target a US demographic as well. And so having someone like me with a national reach in the drink industry and located in the US is important, and it's relevant to the campaign. So those are things that you need to consider. Where is the influencer located? Budget. Budget is everything, right? You can have big league dreams but little league budget, or vice versa. You can have a small budget to work with, which is awesome depending on how you execute. So not all campaigns require a huge budget, but you do have to take that in consideration because, and we'll dive into this here in a little bit, some of the people that you would like to work with, or the brands that you'd like to work with, might come with a certain cost range for the projects that they work on. And so you really have to factor in, what is the budget that I've allocated to this, and what can we accomplish with that particular budget? Also, previous sponsorship performance. This is a big one as well, because it's important to look over who they've worked with before. Like, what are the brands that have trusted this person before? Who have they worked with? How did that partnership go? So do some research there as far as seeing how they work with them. What are the elements of that partnership? How did people respond to it, engage with it? So those are some things. Also, too, in terms of exclusivity, that's a part, and I'm going to cover a little bit of that moving forward. But say, for example, the brand is a bourbon brand and they want to work with Apartment Bartender, but I already have an existing partnership with a bourbon brand that might have just ended. Typically speaking, that might shy away a brand from working with me because my audience has grown accustomed to this other brand of bourbon that I've been working with for 6 months. So you really have to be conscious about not just picking up where another brand left off. Or if you do, at least provide a little bit of buffer time before you launch that partnership. Otherwise, it might just look like the influencer is taking on all these partnerships and not really focusing on adding the most value for their audience, which can kind of take a ding to the trust that you have and that you're trying to leverage. So take into consideration their previous sponsorship and partnerships and do some research on how those worked out. And then lastly, referrals. Like in the world of influencer marketing, so much of my business and so much of my partnerships have come from people that I've worked with. For the brands that I work with, they might be managed by an agency, and someone from that agency went over to another agency and referred me to their client. So referrals is a big thing, because again, that's based on trust, and think about who they've worked with previous, or if someone recommended them, that could be a consideration for working with that particular influencer. So there are also a lot of platforms out there that will give you a breakdown and answer a lot of these questions for you. This is a screenshot that was pulled from a service that was actually approaching a friend and a client of mine, and they were going through and they found this screenshot of me. And so this is kind of how that platform, I'm not familiar with what that platform was in particular, but this is kind of how they broke it down. They said Elliot is in the food and drink industry, or apartment bartenders in the food and drink space, location, United States. What is the audience size across all their platforms? So around ballpark of 65,000. What is the reach of that platform or of that audience size? So almost 12,000. They somehow, through an algorithm, ranked my influence to be at 79 in the food and drink space, primarily spirits industry. And then they give a breakdown further of, okay, on this social media platform, gets an average like per post of 906, gets an average of 37 comments on a particular post. So that's giving you insight into how do people engage with what I post. So if I post something on behalf of your product, you can kind of expect to see around this range depending on what the different elements of that partnership are, Facebook, and it goes into that. But there are a lot of services out there and platforms that will allow you to get a breakdown on all these things to consider when working with that particular influencer. Now, it's really, 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 really important that you don't assume that following indicates influence. It does not. This photo will show you that you can buy followers, you can buy subscribers, you can buy these things. And so when you think about influencer marketing, a big reason why it might come with some preconceived notions and maybe a level of being jaded is because a lot of people take shortcuts to their audience. But that is always going to reflect in the campaign and the partnership that you have. Again, back to that quote. If you don't choose the right person to work with from the start, your campaign and everything following that is doomed to fail. So make sure that you're taking the time to vet that audience. You can look at their comments, you can look at the likes if you're on social, you can look at the views on YouTube. There are ways to vet whether the audience is valid and whether they're really engaged and whether that person really has trust built up with their audience or whether they're faking it. And it's really easy to tell, and there are so many platforms out there right now that are dedicated to providing businesses with the opportunity to do that so that you're not taken advantage of. Because in the end, what that does is just puts a bad name on influencer marketing. But if you do take the time to vet that person's audience and you do take the time to do your research on that particular influencer, it will really pay off because, again, working with the right people is so important. So here are some of the platforms out there. 4Card is a one. What's really awesome about some of these platforms is they're dual platforms. So for me as an influencer, I can sign up for those platforms. And one, it might give me the opportunity to have a media kit. And so I have a consolidated a paid or a consolidated sheet to give to brands to give them all the information they might be looking for. On the flip side, if you're a company and you're saying, you know what, this is so much and I don't even know where to start still, these companies do this for you. These platforms connect brands and influencers and create the campaigns and manage the campaigns and give you the analytics and pretty much from start to finish or idea to execution, make sure that you're able to execute on these influencer marketing campaigns. And they take out all of the They take out the lack of clarity for you. Find Your Influence is another one. This is a really good one. And again, some of the partnerships that come from me, what these platforms are really good for is if you say you are an influencer starting out and you're really looking to grow and expand the business partnerships that you have and the brand partnerships, they bring those to you. And it brings it to you with a budget set, scope of work, what the objective is, timeline and deliverables required. And so you can then just say, yes, I want to do this, or no, I don't want to do this. And depending on that platform, if they do have a staff, that staff can also negotiate rates on behalf of the brand based on what budget is available. So again, these platforms are just 2 platforms, but there are a lot of platforms out there that'll handle influencer marketing for you. And I think these are really good. Now, how will you activate your influencer partners is another thing to consider. Is, in short, what are they going to be doing, right? What do you want them to do? So when a brand approaches me, one of those main questions is, hey, this is what we want to do. How do you work with brands? What do you do? And so for me in particular, I have a menu, right, that I provide to prospects, potential brand partners. And so what we do is media, we do content creation. So we provide photo and video content. If you don't necessarily want that to be posted and distributed across social media, we can also just provide you with content to use on your own social and digital channels. Events, what I was talking about, the kitchen and bath industry show with LG that I went to, or the media launch events with Hilton. These are things that I offer within Apartment Bartender, so that if you wanted to bring us out to create recipes and be on site, we could do that, or to help co-host events with your brand. And what I really love about events is it just gives a physical experience for people. It takes it off the platform, it takes it off social, and it just gives people a way to interact. So it's a little bit more on the experiential marketing side, but using influencers to do that and execute that. Consulting, kind of what I'm doing now, right? Talking about influencer marketing, talking about social media strategy with brands, taking a look at their campaign and maybe helping on the creative side, and then helping to execute on bringing in other influencers to work with you. Social media partnerships, recipe development. Sometimes brands approach me and they say, hey, you know what? We don't necessarily have the budget to post, but we'd love to have a menu created. What I did with Hilton, that was a big part of the scope of work and how they activated me, which was creating a cocktail menu. And promotions, say you're doing something, there's another brand that I worked with that had the biggest sale of the year. They only have one sale a year, and it's a Black Friday sale. And so we worked together to help promote that sale to my audience to drive sales for them during that sale. Now, here's an example of some of the ways that brands activate, right? Events, you have consulting and like being able to speak to future trends, giveaways, recipe development, cocktail development, media, and content creation. So when you're thinking about the influencers that you're working with, ask them what they do, right? How do they work with brands? Because they should have a list of services. Influencers should perceive them as their own brand. Approach them as a creator, approach them as a business as well, and find out what they do, because not all of them necessarily do the same thing. And so how you activate them is dependent upon how they relate to their audience and what their audience wants from them, and the services that they provide to the brands that they work with. So based on that, they may or may not be relevant to work with. Next thing to consider in terms of strategy and employing influencer marketing, where will the content be distributed, right? So most of the time it's going to be on social, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. The primary ones are going to be YouTube if you are a YouTuber. For me personally, I have all these social media channels, but what I've noticed are we want the content to be distributed across where I have the most audience, right? So Instagram, Facebook for supplemental. I don't have a lot on Facebook. YouTube, if we want to create content for people to go back and reference. Those typically might be a video. So if I take a trip and if I say, for example, I just went to San Francisco recently and did a project for a brand that is the official partner of the official whiskey of the 49ers, and we wanted a YouTube video to live there, that might be something that people reference for education, and so that's different than Instagram. So when you're thinking about the content, think about where is this content gonna live? Is it gonna live on social? Is it gonna live on web? Am I taking that and using it internally? Am I taking this content and pushing it out for PR purposes? Another thing to consider, how much budget will you allocate to your campaign? Now, when it comes to money, there really isn't a lot of information out there that says the same thing and how much each influencer charges or how much budget you should allocate. That really is on the brand and agency side, something that you need to work out within your own marketing budget. And then also on the influencer side, not all influencers charge the same things. Now, the cost of working with an influencer varies by audience size, reach, celebrity as well. So how they break it down, a normal breakdown is from micro to celebrity. Micro influencers usually have about 1,000 to 5,000, it says 5,000 here, but 5,000, 25,000. Small influencers might have about 25,000 to 100,000, 100,000 to 250,000. So it goes up and it scales. However you want to define that, just know that whatever their audience size and how valid that is and how their audience responds to them really is important and factored into the cost of working with them. I'll give you an example for myself after this. The most common influencer budget though is 1,000 to 10,000 a year, followed by 100,000 to 500,000 a year. 7% of companies plan to invest over $1 million in influencer marketing in 2020. So it really does depend. Again, you can see the fluctuation, but what I want you to see from this is that budget should be allocated to it. Now, for me, when you think about working with apartment bartender, and if I say, hey, you know what, the rate is going to be $5,000 for the package that you're asking for. The reason that is because I create and my team creates our own content. So the brand might want several recipes with their product, which takes time to develop, takes product to develop, takes time to develop those recipes. They want the images to be shot. They want those images, they want to use those images across all their digital channels and own the rights to those images. So not only are you paying for the time to actually create the content and the recipes, but you're also paying for the licensing costs to use those images for ad purposes or for paid media. You might want to bring me out to an event as well to actually guest bartend. You might want to have those recipes. Like think about the Hilton partnership where I wasn't necessarily just developing the recipe and creating the content around it, but I was also going around to different locations hoping to promote the menu that we launched. And then also that being distributed across my social channels. So posting on Instagram, doing Instagram stories, say they want 3 to 5 posts plus Instagram stories, that's an entire process in itself. So when you see the budget of 5 or 10,000 or 15,000 or whatever the number might be, just take into consideration what are you asking that influencer to do and what is it really going to require from them. And so again, look at this and think of it as a mix of all those things. It's not just why is it $10,000 to post on Instagram? That's not what you're asking. You're asking for all these other things. So take into consideration what deliverables do you want? How do you want to activate them? What's the scope of the work on their end? And keep this in mind that at the end of the day, an influencer is a creator, not a media buy. The more we approach them as creators, the more we maximize the potential of their work. Now, a lot of my friends work on the agency side, and when you think about working with someone like myself in the social space, it's really important to realize that you can go and you could put sponsored ads out and you can reach a number of people. But what you're really paying for as well, and what you're really wanting to leverage, again, is the trust that we have with our audience. The trust that we have with our audience is hard to measure at times, because you have the work and the scope of work that you're investing in as well, but you're also investing in that trust, because what you're trying to accomplish might be to raise awareness, to promote, to get people excited, to drive sales. And I'm going to show you some examples of how that works. Another thing to consider in terms of your strategy is how will you use or repurpose the content on other marketing channels. So back to a lot of the brands that I work with might be asking for photo content. And I'll give you an example. The Cooper and Thief wine brand that I worked with, those images and the content was not only used to post on social, but it was also used internally. It was used in terms of pushing out towards, for PR purposes. It was used for their ambassadors, that when they were going into bars and selling Cooper and Thief into those various accounts and looking to get menu placements, they had a recipe book to deliver. So the content was not only just to post, the content was repurposed in a lot of different ways. And so think about creators in that sense of when you're working with them, and if they do create their own content, what else can you do with that content? Depending on what you want to do with that content, you might have to find out how much that costs or what the fee of that would be. But there are certain times when you develop a relationship with a creator and a content creator over a period of time where you have access to the content that you use, and you can do that. So depending on whether you're a really big global brand or whether you're a craft brand, it really depends. But always look to see what else can you do with that content. I want to give you an example. So I had a partnership with Marriott, and one of the things in the partnership was geared towards a hosted stay. So this is a property in San Diego. I went on site. What the deliverables were, I believe, 2 posts, and then during that process, documenting the experience on Instagram stories, posting about it. For that particular location, they were looking to really push more on the food and drink menu and their seasonal menus that they were coming out with. Through that process, though, they really wanted to get content to repurpose for their own social channels and their own digital channels, because that particular location wasn't, they wanted to increase the quality of the content. And so during my time there, yes, I'm posting, yes, I'm documenting the experience, but I'm taking photos and taking videos anyway. So these series of questions are things to consider when building out your strategy and your game plan for your influencer marketing. So when you are approaching influencers and deciding who to work with, ask all those questions. Walk yourself through this process, and the answers to those questions are going to help you build a game plan around who you go for, how much you should pay, what you want to accomplish, what the deliverables should be, and how to execute on that. And next, we're going to dive into how to take all that and incorporate it into a concise campaign and how to execute on that.